This episode is brought to you by AutoTrader. Look around. What do you see? Cars. Lots of them. And guess what? They're probably on AutoTrader. Whether you're into timeless classics or the latest trends, if you see it on the road, you can likely find it on AutoTrader. New, used, electric, and one day, maybe even flying cars. See a car? Find it on AutoTrader. Visit autotrader.com to learn more.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Now, 2 pigeons and Coach Prime bemoaning the fact you can stream DirecTV satellite-free.
These humans get the biggest college football games on DirecTV,
and we don't even get a satellite dish.
Enough squawking.
It's Coach Prime.
Bring it in. Sure, they could get all that college football without a dish, but you still got your passion, your drive, your resolve, your
incredible career as a football icon?
No, that's me.
Stream the biggest college football games. No satellite dish. Visit DirecTV.com.
Come meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good morning. Welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. With me, as always, Alan Medlock, a Medlock One. We're coming to you Saturday morning after it was all made official. The Cardinals dropped the game last night to the Guardians and are officially eliminated from playoff contention. Alan, I don't know that meant a whole lot because that feels, we've kind of written them off a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. We've documented it here quite a bit. You could just not to keep going back to the same, not to keep going to the well, but the sweep in Cincinnati right after the break was the one that felt like the backbreaker to me. It was one of those to go in. Cleveland still has a lot to play for. They're trying to clinch, and I didn't get to watch as much last time, but I watched the recap and some things today, and I like that Cleveland team anyway. To see them come in and do what they did, not really surprising. I've been actually kind of impressed watching and having some fun watching the Cardinals play right now. I mean, with Walker in the lineup every day, doing some things, and they've actually been an enjoyable watch. Like I felt like, I felt like I had more anger losing the potential 4-game sweep against Chapman when you hit 2 balls hard with a runner on to tie the game up, and I was like, okay, this feels pretty good. I said that it's kind of out of the fog of just thinking, boy, where are things going to, hey, let's just enjoy it and watch the game every night.
Yeah. And I will say, it used to be, I mean, here we are, 8 games left. And this is, if you want to put it in quotes and everything, but they're playing 8 meaningless games.
Yeah.
And there was a stretch where the Cardinals had only played like 2 or 3 meaningless games over 7-8 year period, but even then it was, like 2016 or 2017 where they were in it until like the last weekend, but that was when there was only one wild card team. Now there's 3 wild card teams and they're out of contention for even that last spot with over a week to go. It's I don't know. It just I mean we've talked about it all the time, but the culture, the expectations, everything has shifted so far down from where it used to be that it's somewhat hard to imagine things sliding back up.
Yeah, it's yeah. I think you touched on the word that, I mean, as a high school coach, I have to bring this up all the time. But the culture has completely changed, and I think that will be that's the litmus test to me to see what how they approach some of these challenges that 10 years ago seemed absurd, of no one in the seats. That's going to be big. And you know what? I think there's a lot of skepticism that this isn't going to change too much, because ultimately it's the one that calls the most shots that's the biggest stumbling block on how these things are going to change. But you're right. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, the expectations are low now, and
Yeah.
y- I remember being extremely upset, whenever they were eliminated from playoff contention with Matheny one year, where, I
Mhm.
mean, it took me a couple days when they got eliminated on the last day of the season, to where now I'm just like, hey, let's watch and have some fun and enjoy it, because we only have a few days left. And you know, it's just an odd situation right now. And I feel like it's going to be active fairly quickly. And if it's not, it's going to be ugly next year.
Yeah. Bernie was talking this week, Bernie Nicholas, on his show, and in his writings, about how the Brewers have taken over the NL Central. And I think that's actually pretty accurate, right? I mean, the
Sure.
Cardinals from, I don't know, at least 2000 until what, 2016, 2017, probably, maybe. They always were like, they didn't always win the division, but they were always the team to beat, right? And teams would rise and teams would fall, and the Reds had a couple good years, and the Pirates made her a couple of runs, and all this, and people, wax and wane, but the Cardinals were always there. And I don't think you can, even when Milwaukee probably won the first of their division titles, a few years ago, it was probably like, okay, well, the Brewers are having their moment, right? And that'll last a couple of years, and then the Cardinals will, I mean, the Cardinals will be right there every time. They'll take their place, and somebody else will come up. And I don't think we can say that anymore. I mean, and we probably haven't been able to say that for a little bit of time, but I think it's very clear that the Cardinals are not special in this division anymore. And they're definitely, if they're not special in this division, which has got its lots of problems, they're definitely not special in baseball as a whole. And I mean, that is a bit of a culture shock. And you're right. It does depend on how much Bill DeWitt Jr. wants to get back to where they were and what he's willing to do. Um, we've talked about it, and David Jones and I have talked about it on Gateway, about how next year could be just kind of a placeholder year. Mo's last year. You've got Michaelis and Matt's on contracts for one more year. A lot of these other guys are getting older.
Yeah.
Is that what you expect? Because to me, I kind of expect it, but I also think it's kind of a waste of a year.
Oh yeah. I think at this point there's a zero chance that can happen, and if it does, it's going to be. I think that you will see plummeting attendance figures. Um, this isn't knee jerk reaction to me now. I mean, because I feel like everything comes to an end. I feel like you said it best whenever the talk of Molina coming in to manage was brought up. You get hired to get fired.
Yeah.
In these jobs, and at this point, I think that it's run its course. They're middling, and that's the worst place you can be in right now. And when you talk about not being the place setter in the division, the troubling part is that everybody's needles pointing up except St. Louis. And that's very disturbing at this point. So the thought of the place setting year next year to be like, okay, this will be Mo's last year. Let's play out these contracts. I think that would be devastating. I've flipped a coin, or I've kind of changed my approach on this. I don't think. I think I think someone has to clearly be calling the shots. That's not Mo. And trust me, I'm top high ranking fan of Musial. I think that it's understated what he's actually done here. But I think that he's going to have to take a back seat to somebody else, and I think they have to fire Marmol just because I feel like that is Mo's guy. And I think that you're going to make a tectonic shift in what this is going to look like. I think that's where you have to start. And where we talk about some of the contracts, you're going to have to eat money and move Michaelis. I don't think you can have at best, and I mean at best, you can either have one of Gibson, Michaelis, and Lynn at best, and it can't be more than that. And it wouldn't bother me if it was none of them. And you're going to have to double down with young guys, or you're going to have to go out and spend money, which isn't their MO. But I think it's at a point now to where I think that, hey, just waiting on next year, that's over. I think that this is the year where everybody, and I'm guilty of this, of thinking, okay, we're still the Cardinals, they're still the Brewers, everybody else is still who they are in the division, and that's just not the reality anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, we went into this year saying, the Brewers, and we've said it a lot of times, right? The Brewers don't have enough pitching, and their offense isn't that great,
Yeah.
and and to be fair, I mean, they've obviously overplayed what almost anybody expected.
Yes.
In part because they know what they're doing up
Yeah.
there, right? I mean, again, Bernie's got the wrote numbers about how much more the Cardinals are spending versus the Brewers, and then what the results have been. But yeah, I think that it has gotten to where we kind of underrate them. It's like Council's gone, and he was a secret sauce, and yeah, it's just the Brewers are a good organization, and they're an organization that doesn't look like they're going to, you know, slump off anytime soon. I mean, we talk about the fact that the Cardinals didn't get as much production out of Goldschmidt and Arenado as they expected.
Yeah.
But,
I want to build on that too, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Milwaukee's had, Christian Yelich had a good year, but he's also been hurt, which is, I mean, standard. I mean, they're kind of used to that. But again, it's not like they've got a guy carrying them. They've just put together a good team.
Yeah. And it's, you're right. And Leach had a great point on a Seeing Red podcast, to where, yes, we know, and I've been beating this drum for 3 months, that if your stars aren't going to be stars, you're not going to be very good. But you've also received zero production out of Gorman and Walker.
Yeah.
And if you wanted, I would think if you true serum the Cardinals, they wanted Walker to be Jackson Cheerio.
Mm-hmm.
And look what he's done. You know what I mean? It's just everything's going right now, and in Milwaukee, and that's it. And I'm giving him praise, not jealousy, type of situation, because I felt like that was the case in St. Louis forever. And and now I mean, you and I both agree, and anybody that listens to us, I'm like, we'll almost all agree that now we're seeing what everybody else is seeing, and it's not pretty. And one thing that we thought was always be a mainstay, and that would be bodies in the seats, isn't there anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of thought that if things went bad, that people would still show up, and I think that people still show up probably stronger than other teams in these situations.
Sure.
I mean, they're not quite to the you can count them on one hand situation that you've seen in other places, but it's definitely a drop off. There's definitely, and for an organization that relies a lot on attendance for what they're talking about bringing in, revenue wise, it's got to be notable, right? I mean, and because we're not, I mean, it looks bad, but even if you sold out the stadium, if only half of the people are showing up, it looks bad. Now, granted, it might not, that kind of thing might not change, but the optics are not great. And I think that would make an impact too, but they're not selling out the stadium, right? I mean, they've had record low attendance numbers, and that's tickets sold. So yeah, I agree. What I would like to see Mo in kind of like what Gary LaRocque did, right? He retired. He's going to be advisor next year. I'd like to see Mo as an advisor. As you know, I know that Jeff Jones has talked about him maybe taking over the really focusing on that pitching lab issue down in Florida that's been lingering for a decade now. Um, putting him in charge of something and having him around, but taking him out of not only the day to day, but really being expected to be the day to day guy, right? I mean, when he moved up to president of baseball operations, we thought, hey, Michael Gersha's going to be this guy, and Mo's going to be around, and he's going to be important, but he's not going to be, the only guy we ever hear from. And that's kind of the way it's been. So I don't think you can just bump Mo up to assistant to the owner and then everybody's still asking him questions and he's the one that's the face of you can't do that. I don't think.
Sure. I
And
completely agree
again,
with you.
And just like I'm big on Mo. He's done a great job. I appreciate a lot of his honesty and candor, because we've had that. We've had 9-10 times where we've interacted with him at blogger days and stuff like that, or he's done Q&As for us. I mean, he's been open to a group of people that he didn't have to be open to. And I think that, again, he's going to be a Cardinal Hall of Famer. He's got, there are people that have made the case that he's got, Cooperstown credentials as well. I don't know about that because it's always hard to judge executives and how they get in, but I do think it's time. I think that we've gotten to the point where, what worked 10, 15 years ago isn't going to work today. And I'm
Yes.
not sure the organization has figured that out yet.
No, that's you hit the nail on the head on that one, because I agree with everything you said, because there's even one of those situations to where I'm like, man, well, it's a gut punch to see him go because he's so candid with us and he's so good to communicate with. And in one of those, I think we can agree with that. If anybody that's had any run-ins at all, but you can see they're being lapped in developmental processes, and that's troubling. Just because you see the young guys that used to come up and catch fire because they were part of the machine are now coming up and stalling when they get there. And I think that's probably the biggest death knell to what's going on. I mean, going into opening day this year, they're like, hey, if the three veterans can just provide innings, they're going to be there because they can hit. Well, they did their job, and then the Cardinals can't hit.
Yeah.
And it's, that happens way too often, where we thought that was just an off year and it would catch up and level out at some point. Just, this isn't happening. And sometimes words get stale. We've said that with managers forever, and, revamp the approach, and you don't have to blow everything up. But there does need to be more focused resources on development, and maybe even big league development, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely don't have the answers on, but something has got to be there.
Sure.
And I don't, I wrote this week at the Substack, some options if Chaim Bloom doesn't take the job. I feel like it's pretty clear. I mean, it's not a slam dunk, but it feels like, if Chaim Bloom wants the job, it's probably his, right? I mean, he just may not want it. But there are some interesting names out there, and one of them, I mean, Kimning is quite intriguing, and I think that would be a lot of fun and a lot of good, a good change to have. But
sure.
One of the names that somebody mentioned, and I think we've maybe talked about on here, is Sig McGall, who is in Baltimore, but he started in St. Louis, and he was part of that group that was under Ludnow that all kind of scattered to Houston, when Ludnow went down there. And I think, it got to the point, and if you remember, it got to the point where John Mozeliak had to step in and say, no, you can't take anybody else, because they took so many people out of the organization that he had to finally say, you've got enough. And if you listen to, especially Ben Humphreys over on the Cardinals Off Day, and he brings this up quite often. I don't think that they've ever recovered from that, from having some of the smartest people in baseball leave their organization. They
Yeah.
just didn't replace them the way that they should have. And to some degree, that goes back to that argument we have all the time, right? That they're too insular. They promoted from within. They didn't necessarily go out and heavily recruit some of the, smarter organizations, or they thought they knew how to do it. And that, I think to some degree, they thought the people were interchangeable, right? And that they had the formulas, that they had the analysis, and anybody could do it almost. I have a feeling that there was a little bit of that, right? That there was some idea that, you know, Megdal created some analytics, and it's like, okay, well, we'll just plug this in. He left it because we know how to use it, and it doesn't. I mean, there's still that human element that has to be there.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's I don't know. Here's my. How do I say this? Can somebody come in and keep Flores and the rest of the group, and it be convincing that there's been enough change?
I think so. I think there are ways to do that. Flores has done a fairly good job. I think that sometimes we overrate it, sometimes, but he's done a fairly good job, I think. And I think you could come in. I think honestly, you bring a Heimblum into the main role, and you could probably, especially if you start seeing other changes, probably say that's at least a start. I mean, I don't know that you have to completely clean house. Now, if you did, that would also make sense. But I made an argument in my post that you could even promote Gersh to where Mo is if you brought in a GM that you gave a whole lot of control to, right? And Gersh is your institutional history guy, because you need those kind of guys.
Yeah.
That has the relationship with the owner and all this kind of stuff. And then you bring in like a Ning or something like that. That is the GM that really has a lot more power than like a normal GM. It's almost like a power sharing thing to some degree. I think you could even do that, and people would be interested in seeing that. It's just, I think you need some new faces, but you definitely need a new approach, no matter whoever's there.
Yeah, it's. I just kind of wondered how deep it would be to re-energize a little bit. But is that faction? Is that one of those that's closed off enough to the general fan that no one will really notice? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, because anybody that listens to us or talks to us or does that, I would assume we research and everything more than just the general fan of this. Is that not? And I don't want to sound super egotistical on that.
No,
would
but
that be?
I think that if you're listening to podcasts, if you're doing podcasts, if you're you're reading stuff, you're doing more than just checking the box score or watching the game.
Yeah, and it's so I just kind of wondered if me personally making a bigger deal out of it if is it Bloom and he keeps everybody, is that enough, or is it somebody that needs to change everything, and is that what the expectation will be to re-energize? And I don't know but I do kind of wonder. I feel this goes back to something that you wrote about probably 4 or 5 years ago, and how the Cardinals are just very insular. And I think that they're kind of paying the price for that now. And that's one of those to where you would have, if you'd have asked me a month ago, heck, maybe 2 weeks ago, if Marmol was a complete safe, I would say 100%. And now I think that he has to go. And that's maybe not fair to him, because I don't think he's a part of the problem what has happened this year. But I do think optics and change of culture and perception, I think they go hand in hand.
I think there's a lot to that, right? I mean, because you were saying, does the front office change mean enough? I think that you could just bring in one person, but you have to start showing those results. Start showing that there's a different mindset, and honestly, that's how a lot of that is signaled, is by changing managers or changing some of the stuff. I agree. I think Marmol's done a fine job. There's an argument, for the fact that the Cardinals are at 500, but their expected record is what, 10 to 12 under .500 because of the run differential, that he's had one of his best years, honestly, because he's done a fine job with the bullpen. Now, granted, it's just like Whitey Herzog, right? If you've got a good closer, you're a smart manager. And Ryan Helsley has made him a smart manager to some degree this year, um, but I don't think it's his problem. I think that he has not lost the clubhouse. He has not made anything. I think he's made. I mean, granted, I'm not watching as many. I'm not watching the games because of various reasons, but um, from what I can tell, I don't think he's made even as many questionable moves as he might have made last year. Right? I mean, he's not letting starters go too deep. Just trying to get them a win. He's not doing. It's not. It's like a little bit. Every once in a while, you're going to have a questionable bullpen management just because we may not be somebody available or something of that nature. But for the most part, I think he's done a fine job. But I agree that, especially if the Cardinals bring in a new person to be in charge, they're probably going to want their own guy. And they may want to clear that out just to say, hey, this is a fresh start. And it's not fair to him. Now Turner Ward and he loses his job, then yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think there's a legitimate case there, right? But I think, yeah, I think Dusty Blake probably stays, no matter who comes in. I think they'd probably try to keep Dusty Blake. But other than that, I think everybody's fair game.
If I were to say, yeah, no, I agree. If I were to say, I would say McGee is probably a 99% chance to return in some capacity.
Yeah.
Blake maybe a 75, and everybody else I think is probably out. I would assume.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Willie McGee's going to be. Willie McGee he will do what he wants to do, right? I mean, just like Jose Akindo, they're never going to fire a guy like that. He's going to have a role if he wants it. Now, he also may be getting to the point where he's ready to go home too, especially if everything else around him changes. But you never know. But I agree. I think that, I don't think, and coaches are, we sometimes overstate what they do or how important they are anyway. And it's not a bad thing to, maybe to cycle through them, except for the human cost, of course, of these people having to lose their jobs and all the stuff that goes along with that. But on a baseball sense, it's not a terrible thing to rotate through these guys. But yeah, I mean, if you told me Oliver Marmol was going to be manager next year, I wouldn't be shocked. But I mean, I understand what you're saying, that you're right. If you're going to try to signal we're doing something different, and especially with Skip Schumacher going to be on the market, and again, that gets a little bit to the insular thing because Schumacher's from the St. Louis Cardinals, but he's also been in other places. He's worked at other spots. I think that it would be less of that. But I mean, it's going to be very tempting for them to, fire them all, hire Schumacher. Now, the problem is there'd be really tempting for them to fire them all, hire Schumacher, and stop there.
Yeah.
And say, "Ooh, look, you got your new manager."
Sure.
I mean, I don't think they would, but they're still at, okay, well, we're changing the culture, we're changing the buzz, and that's really all we can do because payroll is going to have to go down. And hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah, that's just. I want to throw some scenarios off of you. If we, I mean, unless we had another topic to go over.
Nope.
Okay. What is what's more likely to happen? Are they more than willing to go and invest in a higher upside arm with expense and an outside bat? Are they more likely to do that plan A or trade Arenado and Helsley and go from there with what you've got? And that's considering not bringing back Goldschmidt.
Yeah. I think more likely would be plan B.
I think that I'm leaning plan B, to be honest with you.
I don't think they trade Nolan Arenado. And I don't know that they need to trade Nolan Arenado. I think there's obviously some decline on Nolan, but I also think he's young enough that there's still another couple of good years in there. I think I wouldn't be surprised for a bounce back year in another, next year or something of that. Not MVP level or anything like that, but a really solid year. And what he has done this year to take ownership of what he is doing and to be that kind of guy in the clubhouse that's going to, mentor that veteran leadership that the Cardinals apparently thought they needed out of Matt Carpenter and Brandon Crawford and all those other guys. I think that all that plus the fact he wants to be there and has the note, has the options of not being traded. I don't think he goes anywhere, but I also think that that's probably more likely than them investing in this team, even though that's what they should be doing.
Yeah. That's
I mean, what do you think?
well, I asked that because I was thinking the only tradable assets that you're going to bring back substance, and to me that's guys that are ready to break into the bigs would be Helsley and Arenado. Not saying that everybody else's value is just so low, but the Helsley deal makes a lot of sense because he's up against arbitration after next year, and or he's out free agency after next year, and then Arenado's Arenado with the contract. But I still feel like you could get a California team to take him pretty quickly, per se, relatively quickly. One of those deals.
Maybe.
And those are movable pieces. And then I do wonder if you don't go into, I would say, a soft rebuild, so to speak, to where you play the young guys, where you maybe move Walker back to the infield where he was much more comfortable, to maybe see if that sparks the bat a little bit more. Maybe move Gorman over there. Maybe that sparks a little bit more. You probably have a pretty decent first baseman in Burleson, and you probably have to figure out what you have with Baker at this point too, if you feel like you can match that Goldschmidt production. And then the outfield is what it is, and you have multiple bodies that could fill that. And you think, well, I would think Sajayce's probably here to stay, and not because of potentially the hot start, but maybe you've done what you can in the minors at this point, and they think that you can be a big league player. Well, that kind of starts filling out your roster a little bit. And that made me think that is that the direction they go? And I'm not so certain that wouldn't maybe energize the fan base too by playing some of the youth a little bit. But you're right. I mean, you have a Hall of Famer at third base now, and he probably finished his career here unless you get real ballsy about it. So I don't know. I do. They're in the worst area, which is right in the middle, and they're going to have to figure it out one way or the other. And there may be some moves that are things that we've always warned about, but we're hesitant to say that was going to happen, that may honestly happen.
I think that it would almost, I hate to say this because I do like you and I know how much you do too, but I think it'd almost be malpractice if they didn't trade Helsley this offseason.
Agree. No, I completely agree. I mean, I know that we had talked about the hater effect at the deadline. I wondered how much he was shopped at the deadline this year.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good chance that I don't think they would. I don't know how much they did because I do think they thought they were in contention. I mean, at the trade, like a week.
He is their best player. I mean, you know what I'm saying? As far as, as he saved 45 of their 77 wins.
Right. I think that at the trade deadline, they still thought they were in contention because they'd been they were in this wild card spot. A week before that, they'd just fallen out. I think if they were like 5 or 6 games out at that point in time, they might have given it more consideration. But it's not a team. I mean, we talked about it at the time. They're not a team that's going to be aggressive like Milwaukee was with Hader, and they're just not. That's just not what they're going to do. It's either going to be clear cut they have to sell, or they're going to buy. I mean, that's just the way it is. But in the off season, I mean, he's not going to be that. Even if he's that great again, though. I mean, you can get close to that kind of production, and you could probably get, like you said, he's one of your few things that you can bring in some sort of talent. And you've got guys, I mean, Jojo Romero and Ryan Fernandez are not going to be as automatic as Ryan Helsley was this year. There's no doubt about it. but could they cover that role, at 80 or 90% of what Helsley did? I think they could, and they're going to do it at a lot cheaper rate. And they're, when you can get talent back in here, because you're right, there's not a lot of assets that you could trade, and there's not a lot of assets that you want to trade, right? I mean, I think we talked about this. I know I've talked about it. Maybe Alex and I talked about it last week. That offense has been such a struggle, but what do you do about it,
Yeah,
right? I mean, because you've got a lot of young guys that you're hopeful are still going to develop. I mean, if you get a good, if Walker starts to develop like we think he's going to, and he's kind of shown a little bit of in September, and if Gorman could ever get some sort of consistency, and there's a lot of ifs, but the ifs are enough that, hey, this could be a really good offense. That's what we thought it was this year, even without Goldschmidt and Arenado.
yeah.
But are you willing to commit to that, or are you willing to cut bait on that? I think that's going to be really interesting.
Sure, and it's we had talked about, and I had toyed around with, hey, if you're gonna go big, go get Tucker, which he's not even up until after next year. But just one, Houston's gonna have to figure out how to pay some of these guys, and it almost seems like they're willing to let Bregman walk now, which may mean they're gonna push their chips in with Tucker. But long story, the Gould report a couple weeks ago that they felt like the next big bat is coming from the outside. And I thought about that, and then I saw some of the names that were posted, and I was like, I don't know if they may come in and help, but I don't know if I wouldn't rather just see a Gorman, Walker. I mean, and Gorman's tough to watch sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But if they are where they are right now, if I wouldn't just rather see those guys in the lineup than go out and bring in something that's going to be a long-term DH or I don't know. I was highly underwhelmed by the names that were posted.
Yeah, I didn't see that article, but the problem with going out and getting bats like that is usually that they are far enough along in their career that they're already they've already hit their best. You've missed their best, right? This is why they've got to figure out their development process, because they need Jordan Walker to turn into, well, I think like Kyle Reese likes to compare to him, Derek Lee, which is, if he could turn into that kind of player, that's great, right? Especially at, when you get the real good years of his career. You need, Gorman to turn into a guy that can hit at least 30 home runs a year without striking out 300. You need that kind of development, because when you go out, and I think we're going to probably, we may have a chance this winter, we'll have to see, to really start putting Paul Goldschmidt's time in St. Louis in perspective. And I know he won the MVP, but I have a feeling that when you compare it to what we thought we would get when Paul Goldschmidt was traded for, I think it's a slight disappointment, right? And again, that's just me. Maybe this is me in the moment because I haven't looked at everything, but it feels to me like as good as Paul Goldschmidt was, I don't think it was quite what we thought it would be. Is that fair?
Well, how much is team performance weighing into that on you?
And that may be part of it,
Yeah.
because we kind of did think that, especially after they got Arenado, that this team would be a contender. But I think about like last year, we talk about underlying metrics a lot. It's a nice catchphrase, and those numbers looked a lot like his MVP year, but the surface numbers weren't there.
Yeah.
And then we've seen what this year is, right? I mean, it's definitely not been what you would want to see out of a Paul Goldschmidt. And I think about 2022. Even then, he started slow, although he had and then he exploded, and it was huge and amazing.
Yeah.
And 19 and 20. I mean, of course, 20 you throw that out, but even I think it was 19 that he was here, right? That they traded for him. But anyway, those early years he has those slow starts, and the numbers overall wind up okay. But I don't know. I mean, and we may have had, and I may have had, and others just overwhelming expectations. But that's just kind of what you get, right? When you trade for a 32 or 33-year-old,
Yeah.
it's going to be good, but it's not going to reach career highs usually.
Yeah. Great point. I completely, and it's in the back of my mind, not to move away from your question, but you and I are both speaking of this in finalities with Goldschmidt, right? But does he come back? I'm not. That's a concern of mine.
I think it obviously depends on what they do in the front office. Because if they bring in somebody new, I don't think they bring Paul Goldschmidt back,
Yeah.
most likely. Because I think that new person is going to want to start fresh. I think that, they've already kind of said if Paul Goldschmidt comes back, it's going to be after he goes to free agency so he can come back at a significantly cheaper rate.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. Honestly, if Paul Goldschmidt comes back and he's not necessarily expected to be the man, the piece, he's not necessarily expected or will play like every day, even if he's struggling, in the right context and situations, I think it can be done. Now, again, even if you bring Paul Goldschmidt back at $8 million, that's $8 million maybe you're not spending on pitching, and that could be, you can make that argument. But I think that if they decide that 2025 is going to be their holding pattern year, then yeah, they probably sign him for another 1-year deal.
Yeah. I hope that we have to eat crow, but how detrimental is that to the process that they're bringing back?
I mean, it's not ideal, especially if they're bringing him back as the man, as the first baseman, as here's your guy. We want him to retire as a Cardinal. I think that it's just more of the same.
Yeah, the reason.
Go ahead.
No, you're right. I just don't think. I don't think Goldschmidt is ready to be Matt Carpenter. I just don't think that. The playing the extra year, I think he has a redemption year in him. That's what he feels that he's ready for, and that concerns me a little bit. But it's also one of those. Am I looking with rose-colored glasses, thinking that hey, I could look really stupid, and this time next year, and the fact that he did have a bounce back, I'm not convinced at 37 he's going to is my issue, but what are the chances that happens, or is it naive to even think that it could?
No, it's not naive to think it could. I think it's a very solid chance that, again, it's not going to be MVP level, but is it going to be better than he did this year? Yeah, I could easily see that. I also think that I think that if he went somewhere else, like Nate and Ben like to say on the Talking About Birds, if he goes to the Yankees and hits 25 home runs, I think we've got to realize that might not have happened in St. Louis, right?
Yes.
He may have gone somewhere that, found a tweak, or was it just a good situation, or whatever the case may be, not seeing the same pitchers and things of that nature. It might have just worked out well. I mean, it could have just been in a trade. Sometimes we'll just revitalize the guy, right? I mean, just a change of scenery. We talk about change of scenery guys. I mean, that can happen. But yeah, I think there's even a chance that he comes back next year and hits. I mean, he's got 21 home runs already on the season. That last I looked, and which is leading the team, right? I mean, we're talking about it. We're talking about a down year for Goldschmidt, and he's still been, tied with Alec Burleson for the team lead in home runs.
Yeah,
which says more about the team than it says about Paul Goldschmidt. I realize, but still,
no, completely agree with that, because that's what my question to you to further this is: are you ready for a 37-year-old season, or not? You
right?
We? What's more beneficial, a 37-year-old season of Goldschmidt or another season of full-time play for Burleson? That's my issue. Is your production going to be better for a 25, 26-year-old Burleson or a 37-year-old Goldschmidt? I don't know, because it's one of those to where I think Burleson can hit. I think that the numbers show that he can, but he hasn't been great after that 6-week stretch.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's where my apprehension comes from, and that kind of makes me wonder where Baker fits into this as well. If that's not going to be the super platoon at first base.
See, I'm just not. I'm not sold on Baker at all
Sure.
as a long term option. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm just pulling up Burleson's splits here. First half he hits 288, 321, 494 with 17 home runs. Second half it's 240, 302, 324 with 4 home runs.
Yeah.
And that's concerning. I mean, I agree that you could argue it's a guy that isn't necessarily ready to play the full season and he still needs some conditioning and he just needs to be. But there's also hey, if pitchers figured him out, is he going to be able to adjust? I mean, all that other stuff that goes along with a young guy that has some success and then struggles. And especially in his case, because he struggles for, 1 or 2 years, even though we thought he'd be good. And then to have that breakout, it's like, okay, here we go. And then you're going right back into that, you know, mire of, um, and so I think that's a real concern. I don't, and I mean, it would really depend on the valuation of the front office, and that's kind of iffy right now, right?
Yeah.
Um, and maybe a new guy comes in and looks at things better, but yeah, I'm looking at just looking at the months right here. I mean, he's only started 14 games. He's played 17 in September, but he's hitting 175, 262, 193. He's looking 193 in September.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think he's that bad, obviously, but
Sure.
is he, is he the 514 slugger that we saw in June? I don't know. I would be really, really hesitant to hand first base over to him full time next year.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it would have to be a platoon type situation, which kind of leads you back to Goldschmidt a little bit more, if that would be the case. I do not think he comes back and accepts to set it at all. That's just the feeling that I get.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. And I'm still just riding that wave right now. If it's not hey, let's just go and see what we can develop, because I do think the guys have to play a little bit. I think there needs to be a little bit. I think there needs to be confidence shown in some of the younger players and a little bit of patience, because it's paying off for other teams.
Yeah. Well, and I think that if you go into a season with a lot of young guys, people are more likely to be able to. I mean, one, expectations are lower, and two, people are more likely to not throw a huge fit when you're 500 or a few
Yeah.
games under, right? Because I think they understand the growth process, especially if you're starting the season with a rotation that's Gray, Fetty, Palante, McGreevy, and Graceffa, which I
I
don't think,
see, and
I
I
don't
think
think
you and
that's
I are
right.
thinking a lot on that, though, because I do think that's the direction you have to go. Because you didn't, of any of the veterans, Gibson's the only one that you could think would come back. I just don't think you can bring back. I think at best, I say that about just one of those guys, and I may even include Mats in a 4-player type situation, to where it's like I just don't think you can afford it at this point to keep him on the roster, because other guys just about pitched him, and you got to start figuring that out.
I got to say, when Lance Lynn pitched this week, which could have been his final start. He may retire. We don't know. He didn't say he was. He said he never wants to stop pitching, but he also realizes he's going to have to at some point in time. And the fact that they activated him from the injured list and he pitched and then they put him right back on it kind of makes me feel like he wanted that one last start.
No,
That
agreed.
push, especially. But when he got done with that start, I happened to look at the box score and I was like, his ERA is 3.84, which is just, I mean, that just blew my mind. I didn't know
Yeah.
ERA is not everything, right? But then I kind of looked and, in his last 5 starts, his last 4, he'd given up 1 run or less
Yes.
in at least 5 innings. I mean, we saw after, Lynn had struggled early on, but he finally, and I'm not saying this means, bring him back.
No. Yeah.
But if you told me in May that when we got to the end of September that there would be a significant argument that you should take Lynn over Gibson, I wouldn't have believed you, but I think there is.
Sure. I am a huge Lance Lynn fan and always have been. And that was probably my favorite signing of the offseason just because of who he is. I've always said this. He keeps you in games. And there's a couple of the big blowout innings. And I was you and I were both in the building one time where I believe where he blew it on a Friday night. We gave up 6 runs, one of which was a grand slam type situation. And some of those were inherited runners, of course. But yeah, I think there was a few of those that have kind of warped what we think about his starts, but he's done his job.
Yeah.
And I think you can say that about Gibson as well, that they've done their job. And that's all that was asked of them. I think that our expectations are high just because we were here. We were thinking, Gray, Snell plus, and they've got, Gray, Gibson, Lynn, which age alone, I mean, I feel like they did their job.
They definitely did.
Yeah. And with Lynn, it's one of those, I think that he's very content being a pitcher for hire to go home, be content with what his career was, and see if he gets called and not worried if he doesn't. That's the feeling that I got. The laughing off the mound. Did you see that with Rowdy Tellez?
Yeah.
It was great. That's why I love Lynn. Just stuff like that. And the next day he was in the dugout, and I noticed that there was a shot of him, and just everybody around him was laughing. And those are the culture guys that you need. And I bet he's probably pretty good behind closed doors, as well. All that being said, I would love to see it, but I think that you do have to move on from the veteran guys. And that is a great point to where you look at scratching the surface of, Gibson's the guy that they bring back. If it was the Lynn that they had to bring back of one of those 4, you're probably not going to get an argument out of me, just mainly because I love the guy.
Yeah, and I think if you bring Lynn back, that it's going to be a split time type of thing because he's going to be hurt, right? I mean, I think that's more than we haven't seen that out of Gibson really, but that Lynn's going to spend some time on the injured list, that's the way it is. But yeah, I mean, you heard what Oli Marmol was talking about how much he was helping helping people, and Palante's talked about how much he would go to Lynn, and Lynn himself talked about how he learned from Adam Wainwright and Chris Carpenter, and he went to pass that down. And that's so important, I think, especially for an organization like the Cardinals that are so tied to their history, to be able to, it's not an unbroken line, but it almost is, right? From like Gibson down all the way, and if Jack Flaherty had stayed, I mean, he had actually learned from Bob Gibson, right? And Carpenter and Wainwright, I'm sure, had their discussions with him as well. And then they take that and they pass that down to, Lance Lynn, and and then it's Palante, and then maybe Palante's passing it down to Quinn Matthews, or stuff like that. I think is really important from a player side of things, especially to have that tradition of building up the next generation with knowledge you got from the older generation and what you've learned on your own. But you're right. I think that, we hear Matt Carpenter say he kind of liked to play in 2025. He barely played in 2024, but, and you start to wonder, they definitely need some of that. I don't want to rule it all out. Right. But, the fact that they had Carpenter and Crawford on the bench for so long did not help them this year. We're having, older pitchers on the staff, was, like I said, they did their job. And if you had told us at the beginning of the year that Gibson and Lynn would look like they did, we would have said they would have won the pennant, right?
Yeah.
Because, it's like, oh, well, this offense is going to support that. And, and of course we didn't necessarily expect Miles Michaelis to be the worst pitcher in baseball. But although maybe some people probably did, but I just, they're going to have to take that balance of yes, veteran leadership is important, but they also need to be able to play. And, I think that's one of the reasons, again, when Nolan taking on some of that leadership mantle and still being a productive member who can show it, I think that's kind of important as well. It kind of gives you that two birds, one stone thing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be. I just have a feeling that it's in this. I don't know. I keep writing this of, is this wishful thinking, or do you really think that this is what's going to happen? Of here in 10 days, things could get a little bit. You're going to start hearing some stuff, and that November presser after they take care of contracts and stuff like that. Just what kind of movement are we going to see? And there's a lot of names that we brought up that are good historic Cardinals that may be on their way out. I don't know.
Yeah, I and it's always a balancing act of,
Yeah.
I mean, so there are some fans, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying there are some people that want to maximize the team, right? There's no sentiment involved at all. If Paul Goldschmidt's been here for 5-6 years, but he's not cutting it, we go on, and that's fine. I get that. I'm not saying that that's wrong or anything. And then, of course, on the flip side of this is there's people that never want to lose a guy ever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm somewhere in the middle, right? Because I do not having Paul Goldschmidt next year and to see him go play somewhere else would be disappointing. Maybe less so than some others, just because he's been here 5 or 6 years, but he did start. I mean, Paul Goldschmidt to me, you come to mind, I still kind of think Arizona,
Yeah.
even though he's been here for so long. I would be more and I'm more emotionally invested in Nolan Arenado. So if he went somewhere else, it would bother me more. But I mean, you've got to have some of that sentiment, I think. But how much? Again, I don't know that you bring Matt Carpenter back, even though if he wants to play again next year, because I don't know that you want to top that roster spot again for somebody that's like that. So there's some decisions that need to be made. I think it's very. I mean, what they do after the offseason might be pretty telling, right? I mean, last year they never did do that last press conference. If they're calling a press conference Monday or Tuesday after the season starts, I think that's going to be. If you see that, this is going to be a big offseason. If they wait till like November or December to do anything, I don't think they're going to do anything of significance.
Yeah, and that would be disappointing. And I think that we will be having this conversation again next year.
Yeah, I mean it's a very good possibility.
Yeah,
but I don't know what that looks like. Because you're right. At least this year the fan base started back with thinking that last year was a anomaly, and they started attending games early on before tailing off. If this is a wait and see 2025, I mean, they're going to start with attendance in the 32,000
yeah,
range, and it's going to drop fairly quickly, I think. I mean, it's still great to see. And I mean, if Jordan Walker going to play all year, Mason Wynn play all year, which he did this year, there are some interesting and fun players to be out there to watch, but as expensive as it is to go to ball games and everything like that, it becomes harder to justify going out to watch a team that's has some interesting parts, but may not be an exciting team overall.
Yeah. That's I think that the ball's in the ownership court at this point, and the direction they choose to go is going to be pivotal.
Yeah. Yep. It's going to be interesting, which is probably more than we can say about this season. But look forward to that off season. Alan and I will be. I mean, we'll obviously do next week's, before the season shows, and I think we're pretty good about doing October. November, December get a little bit spottier, but if you're a new listener, we're around some this winter, and then especially as things happen, if it's a slow week, you're not going to necessarily find us, especially when I start decorating for Christmas. So, which is sooner rather than later. But anyway, one last week of Cardinal baseball. So enjoy it. There's 2 games left at Busch. Then they go to Colorado and San Francisco. So enjoy what we can. And until next time, for Alan, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Good night.
St. Louis fans are one of a kind, and you'll always be in this heart.